on this Saturday night, setting the stage for Alberta's deeply divided election. The heated rhetoric and the last-minute campaign strategies in the contentious race, the controversial policies and the consequences for all of Canada. The calm before Ukraine's counteroffensive.
The Russian military is about to have holy hell unleashed upon them.
End or escalation of the war. Another shocking allegation of Chinese interference, this time targeting Canada's former Conservative leader. Misleading labels and lies.
I think companies need to explain themselves.
The dark side of green fashion.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. We begin in the divided province of Alberta. Less than 48 hours before a highly anticipated election that will shape the province's future and the country's as well. On Monday, voters will decide whether Danielle Smith's United Conservatives deserve to stay in power, despite a slew of controversies, or if Rachel Notley and the New Democrats can have another crack at governing. Over the past few days, both parties have been making their final pitches to squeeze out whatever support they can get. And it all comes down to battleground Calgary, the city that will likely decide the fate of the entire election. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stephenson just interviewed the NDP leader, and she joins us now. Good evening, Mercedes. What's going on the ground, and how confident is Rachel Notley?
Well, we have been talking to Calgarians today as we're walking around trying to take the pulse, and it is absolutely a very close race out here. It's right down to the wire. Rachel Notley was out trying to stir up the faithful and convince those who may join her to come out and vote. She says she's very confident. I sat down with her today, and she says going door to door, they're hearing a lot of people who say they're thinking about voting for the NDP, including some traditional UCP voters. This is what she told me she's hearing at the doors.
The number of people that have come to me during this campaign to say, this is the first time ever that I'm going to vote NDP, but I want you to know I'm doing it, and that's on their own volition. So it's a pretty common message that's out there from folks, and certainly we're seeing it in some of the larger and more public endorsements that we're receiving. And yeah, you know, as I say, we're pretty optimistic.
All right, Mercedes, now to the issues. Oil and gas, obviously a big issue in Alberta. When Notley was in power at that time, the industry suffered significantly. So what's her position on the future of the oil and gas industry now?
Well, it's something that the UCP has repeatedly targeted her on, and she has a very different position than the federal NDP. In fact, Jagmeet Singh's position on this has really been an albatross around her neck in this election as she's gone forward. She says she has a very different plan for Alberta's oil and gas, and it includes growth, including upping oil production. Listen to what she had to say.
We support limiting and reducing emissions. We believe that we can do that while increasing production. We have never suggested you do that by investing in the technology.
So Farah, certainly a very different position there. Whether or not Albertans are going to believe that, a lot are still bitter about her having introduced the carbon tax after she was elected in 2015, something that was not a part of her campaign. But at this point, it's really not about the issues and convincing people anymore. It's about the get out the vote. The NDP and UCP both have to find ways to get people to the polls who vote for them, and to convince those who are feeling ambivalent and like there's not really a party they want to vote for in this to show up and pick their side. We don't have a sense of what those numbers are, but certainly that's going to be revealed to us on Monday.
All right, as the countdown continues to Monday, thanks, Mercedes Stephenson from Calgary. Some polls show the UCP with a slight lead, but there are plenty of other factors that can decide the victor. Joining us now for his analysis is our chief political correspondent, David Akin. David, you're in Edmonton as part of our Decision Alberta coverage team. So what's your sense of the campaign there in the final days?
It is going to be close, Farah. And let me give you the lay of the land as it is in Alberta. This is the election map from 2019. This is all United Conservative blue. Most of the smaller cities and rural areas went UCP in 2019. In Edmonton, that's the NDP stronghold. These are all the ridings in Edmonton. NDP orange, unlikely to change on Monday. The really race is going to be in Calgary. This is Calgary in 2019. 3 seats for the NDP. They're probably going to pick up at least a half a dozen no matter what, but they need much more than that. They need at least a dozen to win. Now, over the weekend, some big endorsements. Former Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi endorsing Rachel Notley and the NDP. And Stephen Harper, the former Prime Minister, out with his second video of this campaign endorsing the UCP. But interestingly, some business groups. The Business Council of Alberta, for example, says this campaign has really been divisive. We've seen some polarization that's threatening the unity of the province, and they say that could even threaten Alberta's economy, Farah.
David, clearly this election is important to Albertans, but what about the rest of the country? I mean, how significant is this election for our national politics?
I think it is significant. I'll give you just one issue, climate change. We know from polls that most voters in the rest of the country, BC, Ontario, and Quebec, they list climate change as one of their top 3 priorities for government. But climate change has really not been an issue in this particular campaign. In fact, both the UCP and NDP leaders have been talking about expanding and strengthening the oil and gas sector. So no matter who is premier after Monday, the Alberta premier is going to have some different ideas, possibly, than the rest of the country about how to transform quickly or at all from oil and gas to something else. That's one. Secondly, if Danielle Smith wins, one of the things she advocated when she won the leadership of her party was something she called the Sovereignty Act. The idea that if Alberta does not like a federal law, then Alberta will not enforce that law. It may not be constitutional, but it's an idea that's caught on with some other premiers, notably next door, Saskatchewan's Scott Moe, maybe Quebec's Francois Legault. So if Smith wins, you may also see increased tensions between Ottawa and Edmonton. So it's a significant election certainly for Alberta. It's significant for the country too. Farah.
David Akin in Edmonton, thank you for that analysis, David. And Global National is hitting the road. Starting tomorrow, our Donna Friesen will be broadcasting from Edmonton on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. Tune in for coverage of Decision Alberta as voters cast their ballots in one of the most divisive provincial elections in years. In Ottawa, the debate rages on about whether to hold a public inquiry into foreign election interference, and new revelations are emerging underlining that threat. Global News has confirmed Canada's spy agency informed former federal Conservative leader Erin O'Toole that he was targeted by the Chinese Communist Party. Erin O'Toole is the second MP to learn this. Touria Izri reports.
As the former Conservative leader and a current member of Parliament, Erin O'Toole takes a tough stance on China.
There is no greater threat today to Canada's interests than the rise of China in world affairs.
That vocal criticism has caught the attention of the Chinese Communist Party. A source close to O'Toole confirms CSIS informed the Ontario MP he is being targeted by Beijing, as first reported by the Globe and Mail.
I think the fact that members of Parliament, former members of Cabinet, any Canadian could come under that type of surveillance threat, targeting, as it has been described, is massively concerning.
O'Toole is not alone. Another Conservative MP, Michael Chong, and his family received threats believed to be from Beijing. This week, the former Governor General and Special Rapporteur David Johnston ruled out holding a public inquiry into foreign election interference.
There are so many questions that are unanswered despite his report. These kinds of issues never go away. Eventually, an inquiry has to happen.
In an op-ed, Johnston defended his decision, writing, "I have never undertaken a mandate more important than this. The work is not done."
If people are looking for fast answers to or more pressure on the government to improve its game on foreign interference, a judicial inquiry doesn't deliver that in any way, shape, or form.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau insists he will respect Johnston's recommendation to hold public hearings instead of a public inquiry. But Trudeau's predecessor thinks Canada is underestimating the danger. In an audio recording obtained by The Globe, former Prime Minister Stephen Harper says foreign interference is far worse than we think and warned against naive globalism. And given the threat, political experts fear partisan bickering is only making Canada more vulnerable.
This has now gone off in a lot of different directions that hasn't allowed us to focus on the central issue, which is the protection of Canadian sovereignty.
David Johnston has agreed to testify before a parliamentary committee June 6. But that's unlikely to stop the pressure the Prime Minister will face next week when the House returns about why he appointed a special rapporteur instead of calling a public inquiry in the first place. Farah?
Touria Izri in Ottawa, thank you for that, Touria. Ukraine prepares to retaliate. Coming up, Kyiv signals a counteroffensive against Russia is imminent. Plus, the new discovery in Egypt unearthing ancient secrets. We are on the eve of what's expected to be a dramatic shift in the war in Ukraine. A top military official says the much-anticipated counteroffensive against Russia is ready to begin. Oleksiy Danilov didn't give a date, but as Sean O'Shea reports, military experts say this may be the only way for the war to end.
As Russia's war against Ukraine rages on and more civilians are killed in attacks like these, it now seems clearer than ever that Ukraine is about to strike back in a way it hasn't in more than 15 months.
We know the Ukrainians have prepared their forces and that it should come very soon.
That much-awaited counteroffensive, which the Secretary of the country's National Security and Defense Council told BBC is coming. In a rare and exclusive interview, Oleksiy Danilov told the broadcaster it could happen tomorrow, the day after, or in a week.
But you're ready.
Recapturing lost territory is key for Ukraine, and time matters because support from Ukrainian allies isn't guaranteed indefinitely.
There is a danger of war fatigue. So the Ukrainian offensive that could actually bring a sooner end to the war is really important for Ukraine and for the world.
At a meeting of Baltic leaders and Germany, leaders reaffirmed support for Ukraine.
So if Russia is just thinking that it could succeed with its robbery of land of Ukraine, it will not succeed with this idea and attempt.
Nice to meet you. In Kyiv, Volodymyr Zelensky expressed his gratitude to the United States, a major supplier of military aid and foreign influence.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Bipartisan support, Congress.
It's the best money we've ever spent.
Republican Senator Lindsey Graham met Ukraine's president as America's own debt ceiling deadline ticked closer. Graham said there can be no backing off of financial and military support for Ukraine now.
But I expect in the coming days and weeks for the Ukrainian counteroffensive to yield results. I'm here to tell you that the Russian military is about to have holy hell unleashed upon them.
This is a really important battle for Ukraine. It is extremely important that Ukraine do well in this offensive.
A month's planned counterpunch Ukraine hopes will hasten the end of this war. Sean O'Shea, Global News.
You just heard Sean mention the U.S. debt ceiling dispute. Well, there are signs tonight that a deal can be reached by the June 5th deadline to raise the federal government's $31.4 trillion debt ceiling. Top congressional Republican Kevin McCarthy says there's progress with negotiations with Democratic President Joe Biden as the nation risks defaulting in just over a week.
Look, I feel closer to an agreement now than I did a long time before, because I see progress. But listen, this is not easy in any shape or form, but that doesn't back us away from it.
So a failure by Congress to raise its self-imposed debt ceiling before June 5th could trigger a default that would shake financial markets and send the U.S. into a deep recession. Ahead, identity crisis within the Métis Nation. Their growing dispute fueling accusations. This ancient discovery out of Egypt has the world in absolute awe. Archaeologists working at the sprawling necropolis of Saqqara, part of Egypt's ancient capital of Memphis, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, unearthed tombs and workshops dating back 4,000 years. Clay pots and other items used to mummify humans and sacred animals were also found at the site. Okay, back to Canada, where deceptive marketing is illegal. But if you're shopping for clothes while keeping sustainability in mind, you might have some trouble navigating some trendy buzzwords like eco-conscious, recycled, or planet-friendly. This week on The New Reality, Kayla McLean explores the rise in sustainable clothing for sale to Canadians and how some companies behind those products are setting themselves apart.
This is the photo shoot for Christy Sumer's latest collection. She's the founder and CEO of Canadian-made clothing brand Encircled.
That looks great. Okay, now we're going to reverse it.
She started the company in 2012 and about 4 years in, wanted to set the brand apart from others making sustainability claims. She applied for B Corp status, a private certification that investigates social, environmental, and business practices, all at her own expense.
I think at that time I had started seeing a lot more greenwashing start to happen. A few fast fashion brands had launched, conscious collections, and I was starting to feel a lot more pressure around that, and I could see that sustainability was becoming a challenge for us to separate ourselves from those that were greenwashing.
More consumers want sustainable clothing options, and brands are responding.
Because of that, I think everybody's still trying to figure out what sustainability means to them as a brand.
And that's where Kelly Drennan comes in.
You're also a B Corp, so that's very exciting.
She's the founding executive director of Canadian nonprofit Fashion Takes Action, working to advance sustainability in fashion for more than 16 years.
Like in anything, there's good actors and there's bad actors. The ones who are doing it properly have the certifications to back up those claims, or they're being transparent.
Bob Kirk is the executive director of the Canadian Apparel Federation, representing a wide range of clothing and manufacturing companies in Canada.
I think companies need to explain themselves. Rather than just having a tagline, a simple statement, we're green, what is it? What does it mean for you? We recommend to our members and to all companies to be very guarded in what they say.
And while other countries are cracking down on greenwashing, including in fashion, for now, Canada isn't making any changes.
We don't need to change all our laws. We just need to find a way that works for the Competition Bureau and for industry and ultimately for consumers.
We reached out to the Competition Bureau to see if it plans to increase enforcement of greenwashing in fashion. The Bureau declined an on-camera interview and did not respond to our questions by a production deadline. Farah?
Kayla McLean, thank you. And as Kayla mentioned, you can see more from her story tonight on The New Reality right here on Global. And that's Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Farah Nasser, and on behalf of our whole crew, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us. Tonight's Dear Canada is the Alberta Legislature in Edmonton. Donna Friesen will be live from the Alberta capital tomorrow ahead of next week's provincial election. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.